I guess most of us would rather like to work flexible hours, the hours that we want on our terms. What's called the gig economy. Short-term freelance work in general appears to have exploded over the last 10 years. The question is it the path to a better work-life balance, or is it exploitation by employers? Glad to have your company. You're watching Roundtable with me, David Foster. There are millions of people who are working multiple part-time jobs. Independence and flexibility, two factors that freelancers say they are the most satisfied with, but they do miss out on workplace protections offered by permanent employment, sick pay perhaps, holiday pay and other workers' rights.
Work at your own leisure, with flexible hours and take time off whenever you want. Sounds ideal to some. But the so-called gig economy feels more insecure to others. There's no guarantee of work, often no sick leave or holiday pay. Is the gig economy a gateway to worker freedom, or open to exploitation by employers, and something governments must overhaul? The gig economy is defined as a freelance economy where workers take on a variety of part-time jobs. But there's a catch. They often don't get traditional benefits like healthcare. Freelancing is a common feature of workplaces in the West, with around 27 million said to take on gig work in the US. The British government says around 2.8 million people worked in the gig economy between early 2017 to 2018, about 4.5% of the population. And it's more of a young person's game, with 56% of British gig workers aged 18 to 34. Independence and flexibility are the two factors freelancers say they are most satisfied with. It suggests social attitudes have changed towards how people want to work, escaping the standard 9-to-5 day. But not everyone is happy. Two of the world's best-known gig employers are Deliveroo and Uber, hiring millions to bring food to your doorstep or drive you around. Firms like Deliveroo can benefit from contractors as they don't have to pay when work isn't there, and also don't incur the hefty benefit costs staff members would demand. But critics believe the lack of sick pay and basic protections is exploitative. Uber and Cityscape have lost tribunals ruling gig workers are not self-employed and should have more benefits. Two British Uber workers took the ride-hailing app to court in 2016 and won the right to be paid the national living wage. The EU is pushing member states to protect gig workers and offer the same benefits staff members would get. The British government also pledged to overhaul the employment rights and improve conditions for gig workers, but has so far stopped short of enacting new laws, drawing anger from political opponents who want more protections for gig workers. The freelance economy does appeal to some workers, but the threats to basic work rights have landed firms in legal trouble. Governments are aware of the problems and say they will do more to protect workers. But there is still some way to go before laws are in place to ensure better protection for gig workers.
And I'm very pleased to say that joining us for this roundtable from Manchester, we have Alan Price, an employment law expert in the studio. We have Brhmie Balaram, researching the sharing economy at the Royal Society of Arts. More of that later. Steve Garelick is here from the GMB Trade Union. He's been involved in workers' rights cases for Uber and Addison Lee drivers. And Julia Kermode, Chief Exec of the Freelancer and Contractor Services Association. And I should say, apart from thank you very much for coming in, that every single one of us at this table has a full-time job, so in a sense we are the lucky ones. Julia, let me come to you first, since you deal with this on a daily basis. You reckon that 2/3 of those who don't have a full-time job but are in employment are okay with it, happy with it?
Yeah, the vast majority of people do make it a positive choice. The Department of Business issued some research in 2016 where they said that 90% of the people that they asked were choosing self-employment, and they were mostly choosing it for flexibility and making it a lifestyle choice that suited them.
Where was the problem as we see in the headlines?
Yeah, I think
people are okay with that?
It is a hard one. Obviously, not everyone is okay across the board. Not everyone in permanent employment is okay across the board. But what we have seen in recent years is a kind of growth in people potentially being exploited, particularly if they don't know enough about their rights and how they're engaged. And of course, as a self-employed person, you're not entitled to any rights whatsoever. And it's when people don't realise that at the outset that the difficulties
Which is where it's an organisation like yours, one assumes, can help.
Yeah, so we're campaigning for people to know more about self-employment and understand what it means, and we're working with governments to bring about some more transparency into the equation. Because
you see, Steve, I'm wondering if there are just an awful lot of moaners out there, because we've got those involved in full-time jobs gone down by just 1%, 62%, probably 4% are gig workers. So where's the beef here?
Well, I don't know that it's necessarily 4%. I think
This is from the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development.
so. This august institution can only get information from ONS, which may not necessarily be accurate. Not everyone is always putting all of their details in terms of gig employment. I think the percentage where the claim is that people are over the moon in relation to this type of employment is tainted. We wouldn't, as a union, GMB union or any other union, be fighting so many cases at this stage if people were wholly happy about their lot in life.
Brhmie, let me ask you, because you work for the Royal Society of Arts, I said more of that later, and the boss of that, Matthew Taylor, produced a report on the changing economy and employment practices. Now, I know that the RSA per se wasn't linked to this, but you know about this. So what changes perhaps are envisaged by Mr. Taylor in his report, and what is the government doing about it?
So the Taylor Review actually said that workers should be entitled to written particulars, which means that they should be entitled to a statement on day one that tells them what their rights are. So hopefully this clarifies the problem that Julia was talking about in terms of people not understanding what rights and benefits they should have. Yeah. But in general, the report also wanted to clarify through primary legislation what a worker is. And I think this is really important to understand, because we're not just talking about self-employed people and employees. We're also now talking about the fact that some gig workers might be entitled to be classified as workers, and this would entitle them to more rights and benefits, such as holiday pay. And so that's what organisations like Steve are fighting for on behalf of some.
And the government came up after the Taylor report and said, this is the headline on the government website, millions to benefit from enhanced rights, Taylor review of modern working practices. Do you think that that's going to happen? Are millions going to benefit?
Well, hopefully, because right now some of those proposals are under consultation, and then following that consultation, the government should be able to act and enact some of those recommendations.
So, Alan, coming to you up in Manchester, sitting patiently there, you mentioned to me that you're getting together next week 100 HR managers for whom you offer advice to talk about the Taylor report. What particular areas do you think they need to concentrate on? And why do you think it's a good idea to do so?
A lot of small employers, as we've talked about, aren't necessarily aware of the differentiation between employment contracts, truly self-employed contractors, and this quasi in-between status of worker. And self-employed independent contractors could work on a regular basis for one or two occasions and be truly self-employed, or in effect work regularly and then get those worker rights, or actually become a full-time or part-time employee. So it's important for employers to know the difference. But this isn't new legislation, this isn't new law. Employment status, employment rights has been around for a long time, and employees or self-employed contractors have the right to bring an employment tribunal claim to get a tribunal to determine their employment status. Yeah. And with the abolishment of fees now, access to that right readily available. The normal sort of court of record or quasi-industrial court dealing with these issues is the employment tribunal in Great Britain and the industrial tribunal in Northern Ireland.
Can I just put a suggestion out there to those of us at the table? We'll come back to you in a moment. Thanks, Alan, for that. Yeah, it's okay to be able to take something to a tribunal if for somebody to say that, but in practice it's a totally different thing, isn't it? When the company you might be complaining about has massive financial backing and you, the worker, have just, well, I mean, without wanting to disparage you, Steve, you just might have the backing of a local union official.
Well, I think in the case of most unions, we don't have a problem over stepping up to the mark when there was a fee situation. Let's be honest, the fee situation was put in to discourage those who really needed it most, as far as I'm concerned. If a case was vexatious, it's going to be seen to be vexatious when the judge is first looking at the case.
I suppose what I'm trying to say is it's a David and Goliath thing, and therefore
well,
it's very difficult for an employer, no matter what Alan says, it's very difficult for an employee to think they're going to get
well,
what
I
they
don't know.
want.
You see, GMB is the third largest union with 617,000 members. We are able to use the largest law firm in the country, which is Union 9. We have access to tiered lawyers such as Lee Day, who deal with employment law, just as we have for private hire and taxi drivers in London, Blackford solicitors to deal with criminal allegations.
Are you saying it's a level playing field now then?
Well, it's a more level playing field for those who don't have union representation. So those who still feel they want to bring a case against their employer now can use the tribunals without the expense that they were being faced with.
Are we talking mostly about younger people here, as suggested in the report? And if we are, why? Why is it the younger
I
person?
think people just don't want a permanent job in the same way that we might have when we were kind of coming through education and kind of leaving to enter the world of work. I think people's expectations are a lot different these days, and I think technology is also driving that. So people think, well, you know, flexibility within the workplace is important for everyone these days. Permanent employees are able to work from home, work flexibly, different hours, etc. It's kind of an expectation, and so the gig economy is just one step further on from that. And
So do you think it's not necessarily something that's being forced on the workforce?
I would
changing
hope not. I think that probably some people feel that they don't have as much choice about it, but at the end of the day, if they want to work and those are the options that are available for them, it does work really well for people that have particular domestic setups that mean that they're not available for sort of more normal employment hours and things like that. They might have caring responsibilities, so they might want to pick and choose when they work. And of course, some of the gig economy will be permanent employees doing gigs as a second job on the side.
Brhmie, I'll come to you in a minute if I can, but let's go back to Alan. You mentioned to us before we went on air that you'd just come back from Canada, and I'm wondering if when you study different workplaces in different countries, you see things from which the UK can learn.
If you look at our closest neighbour, Ireland, we've got a very similar situation in regards to self-employed workers. If we look at Ontario or Australia again, where we operate, you've got a more regulated labour market. But in those occasions, you don't have a more productive workforce to a large extent. You don't have a large amount of employed workers. So I wouldn't say there's a perfect model anywhere in a Commonwealth country in which they derive their labour laws originally from the UK.
Are you saying, sorry, let me get this right, you're saying that in countries which have more people in full-time employment, you don't have as much productivity, or have I misunderstood that?
No, not at all. I don't see in any country such as Canada, Ireland, or Australia a more regulated labour environment with regards to employment law, a heavily more productive workforce, or a different status with regards to self-employment.
I was reading about a case in California, the Californian Supreme Court, that turned this whole thing round so that the onus was then on the employer to prove that the person that they were using for their work was either self-employed or not self-employed, that they would get the benefits or not get the benefits, rather than the onus being on the employee. First from you, Alan, on that one, then Brhmie, you want to jump in on that. So do you think that sort of thing could work?
A reverse burden of proof, basically guilty until proven innocent, is very rare in regards to UK employment law. It would put an onerous burden on a lot of small micro-employers. So in effect, everyone they engage on a self-employed contract basis would be deemed by the employment tribunal to be a worker or employed unless the employer proved otherwise. I think education's important. I think documentation, as Matthew Taylor suggests, anybody going into a contractual relationship, may be self-employed, worker or employed, are fully aware of those facts. With regards to employment status, an employer has 2 months to provide a statement of employment. That leaves a long period for a worker or a contractor or an employee to actually know their employment status. I think a day one issuing of employment particulars or self-employed contract status would be a lot more simpler than a reverse burden of proof.
Brhmie, you wanted to jump in?
Yes, I mean, that Matthew Taylor has recommended that we reverse the burden of proof.
Yeah.
So that's something that the
But
government
is
will be
Alan
looking
suggesting
at.
it's very difficult to do so?
So I think that you make a really good point, and I guess that's just something for the government to consider. I guess one thing that I think that we should try to do right now is be much more precise about the definition that we're using for gig workers. So I think that there's a distinction between just general freelancers and gig economy workers who are specifically using an online platform in order to find work. And the reason why that distinction is important is because these workers are suggesting that the platforms that they're using are starting to exercise more control over them, akin to the sort of control that they would exercise over workers or employees. And so I think it is quite different to somebody that is in business for themselves, that is just picking up gigs in other ways, like as a freelancer, rather than somebody who's working for a platform like
And what
Uber
about the question
or
I put to
Deliveroo.
Julia earlier on? Why is it the younger people? Why don't people of my generation, or thereabouts, why don't they think that this thing is suitable for them? Because actually, as you get older, this sort of thing might work better for you.
I think that there are older people that are starting to wise up to the gig economy and want to participate. But I do think that the reason why we see more young people in the gig economy is because of the lower barriers to entry. So you are essentially, you don't have to have much work experience to start working in the gig economy. I think that when you compare that to other sorts of jobs that are available, such as zero-hour contracts, you actually have a lot more flexibility with something like gig work. So I think in that sense, it is more appealing.
Let me ask you a question, Steve. Do you believe, as Frank Field, who sort of is known as somebody who examines, a British politician who examines the social conscience, if you want to put it that way, he writes that 700,000 gig workers earn less than the minimum wage. Yeah. Is that
It's a pretty
fair
accurate assessment.
So how do they manage?
They work extended hours. You can see it when you pass by outside a fast food outlet and you watch food delivery drivers sitting, waiting for that next order. These workers, especially what I call ghost workers, they provide the service, but the public don't see them.
But isn't there a law that says you can't pay below the minimum wage? So who are they working for?
They're being treated as workers, so they're allegedly working for themselves. When in
And
effect,
you don't have to pay a worker the minimum
no,
wage?
they pay them on a piece rate basis,
Right.
which is why I say, and others have said, gig economy, greed is good. GIG. The benefit is to the people running the app, and the value of the worker is as a drone, and this is as far as they get. They don't.
Drone, not in the sense of an aircraft.
No,
but
just a
drone
worker
as in
drone.
the sense of a worker drone.
A worker drone.
Bee colonies.
Sorry, I just want to clarify that because they are being treated as self-employed. If they were workers, then they would be guaranteed a minimum wage.
Well, they would be, but the point is they're not.
Right, so I just wanted to clarify
and
that.
these companies continue to repel it. They repel it at court because, God forbid, they should pay people the proper amount to have quality of life.
And yet, you know, with some of the pressure that you and other unions have put on, I picked up the headline today that Deliveroo riders are now given free accident insurance cover. People are coming round to it, aren't they?
Well, I believe it's smoke and mirrors. You make it look as if you're doing something right. You put out a positive spin, and ain't we great? We're giving a bit of cover, some accident cover, which frankly doesn't cost huge amounts, especially for liability cover. In fairness, how far is that going to actually supplement the quality of life of that rider?
But before you jump in, Julia, if I may say so, the problem is if you start to push up all of the costs, these people won't have jobs.
And therefore you put the consumer ahead of the worker. And that is what continues to happen. Think about what the consumer pays over what the worker gets paid. And that's why we're in this position right now.
You look so frustrated at what you're hearing.
You've just made one of the points I was going to make, which we've got to remember that it's not necessarily the gig companies that are driving this. It's actually the consumer. So you want to order food online, get it delivered. You want to buy something from Amazon online. You want delivery the same day or the next day or whatever. We as consumers have to take responsibility for this. We are all contributing to this, unfortunately.
Alan, and one of the points I wanted to bring up before we start to wind this up is the fact that only a very small percentage of those involved in the gig economy do jobs such as the ones that Steve's talking about, driving, delivering, etc., etc. An awful lot of them are professional people. So we're talking about not a class of worker, but a type of payment. Is that a fair representation?
You've only got to look at where gig working has come from. The IT contractor industry is massive in the UK. There are hundreds of thousands of IT professionals who work on a gig basis, highly paid, highly commoditized, and highly valued. You've got to look at architects who work on a gig basis. Some journalists, David, work on a gig basis. And there's no issue or dispute with regards to that status.
Doctors who do locum work, they're working on a gig basis as well. So do you think we're hearing a little bit of me think he doth protest too much, that actually it's a good thing all round?
The gig economy in itself provides value where there's a need. The issue is low value jobs, such as delivery, such as driver, where there's a dispute where individual employment rights, such as holiday pay and statutory sick pay, would actually improve their lot. If you're an independent architect working on a gig basis or an IT contractor, you're quite happy with the premium you receive for that element of gig work, and therefore it's less of an issue. The issue has come about, as we've said earlier, across the table, that you've got a big increase in consumers demanding driving, delivery, and therefore there's a whole sector of the workforce now in this employment or in this work status with completely different rights and premiums to what independent contractors.
And if we bring into the government bring in too many laws and restrictions on this, are we not going to restrict the ability of people? This is for you as well, Alan, and for everybody here. The ability of people to do what they want in a way that they want to do it.
Yes, and I think that's why the Taylor Review is trying to find a balance between providing flexibility and security for workers. So he was talking a lot about two-way flexibility and the fact that it's not just about employers deciding when somebody should work, but that also workers should still have that ability.
It makes sense, doesn't it, also, too? I mean, to say, look, I don't need somebody today, why should I pay them?
Yeah, absolutely. You're spot on. And the CBI has produced some information.
For those who don't know, that's the Confederation of British Industry, all the employers' organisations.
So they produced some information surveying their members that said that the vast majority of UK businesses think that our flexible workforce is key to our global competitiveness within the UK. So that's really important that we retain this. And it did come through Matthew Taylor's report as well, this kind of flexibility. It's a balancing act, though, and I think we need to know that. And I also want to point out that not all gig economy employers are sort of exploiting people. The DPD recently have now offered their workers 3 different ways for them to choose to be engaged, either as self-employed or as a worker or as a direct employee.
But am I right in saying that if they do so, they will probably end up on a lower wage?
Yeah, I mean, but then it's an informed choice.
So you pay, give with one hand and take back with the other?
Potentially, but it's an informed choice, isn't it, which people aren't necessarily getting in other places.
Okay, swings and roundabouts,
Well,
Steve. What do we need to look out for now?
I think first and foremost, this idea that if an employer doesn't need somebody, then they can just toss them to the side. You know what? You'll go without for a day. Your family will manage not to feed yourself because you haven't earned for that day.
But that's perhaps because we've become too complacent about things such as holiday pay, sick pay, etc., etc., etc. This is the real world we're talking about.
And in the real world, we're becoming very, very selfish about how we treat others. In the real world, I would like to see a situation where people aren't told, today you don't work, this is workhouse rules, you're lucky that we're even giving you work the following day, like gangmasters. We should have stepped away from that now. We shouldn't be in a position where somebody's scrambling around to look for work and hoping that they'll be able to feed their family or themselves. It shouldn't be like that in this day and age.
Okay, he mentioned, we've got to do this very, very quickly, just the three of you. Steve mentions the workhouse, he talks about scrambling around for jobs, etc. Is that the Britain you see today? Very quickly, Alan.
Just quickly, even with regards to employment status, a full-time employed person can be laid off, they can be laid off for a short period of time, they can be made redundant. all of these protections don't stop an employer with a
Brhmie,
shortage of work of doing
Do you
that.
recognise the Britain as painted by Steve there?
So I think that all jobs have a degree of insecurity in them, and that we're just kind of seeing that, like, we're seeing that highlighted by the gig economy.
Last word.
Gosh, last word, that's hard. I think that, that if people can choose how they want to work, that is the single most important thing, and it's got to be an informed choice.
But the workhouse?
I don't believe it, no.
Okay. Thank you all very much indeed. Alan in Manchester, thank you very much indeed. Obviously, got so much work to do, couldn't come down to London, while Julia came from Manchester. We appreciate your time nonetheless. Thank you very much indeed. Brhmie, thank you, Steve. Good luck with all of the cases you're fighting and, in fact, all of the jobs that you are doing. We will be back tomorrow with another roundtable. We have no time off here. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.